Greetings, beloveds. This is Amy Karen Johnson, the Earth Channel. I do have a message for you from Gaia, Mother Earth today. And first, I would like to thank you for helping me pass 100 subscribers on YouTube. I had asked for your assistance with that last week, and you totally came through. So thank you so much. To recap what I have been talking about and then tell you about a new series that I want to begin, I actually already recorded today's video, and it was a long one. And I realized, unfortunately, just now that it had absolutely no sound. So I feel like my flow has been a little bit off now, thrown off now. And, at the time, my dog was relatively quiet. Now he really wants to play. So I'm going to pause for just a moment, and then I'll come back and do the recap and tell you about this new series. Okay, so in previous videos, I have been talking to you about my unique take on combining human design with sidereal astrology. There have been others who have done a version of this before, but they, instead of what I do, shift not only the 12 signs to be sidereal, but they take where they were overlaid with the tropical zodiac in the way Ra-Uru-Hu has it in his software and shift those as well. However, I leave those hexagrams and gates, 64 related to the I Ching, aligned where they were according to the tropical zodiac, and only shift the 12 signs to align with the sidereal zodiac. And the reason I do this, not to repeat everything, but just to recap, is because there are 8 gates or hexagrams located in the heart center, the diamond in the middle of the chart, or body graph it's also called. And those align with the equinoxes, solstices, and midpoints between those. And I do not think that's an accident. I think that is on purpose and as it should be. So that's why I leave those in the same place where they were originally channeled and shown by Ra-Uru-Hu, who brought the knowledge of human design into the world. However, I do use the sidereal zodiac, the 12 signs, with the sidereal alignment because that's where the stars actually are. In tropical is what Western astrology typically uses, they have not accounted for the precession of the equinoxes, which is basically causes, for example, at the spring equinox, when the sun has an equal amount of time at the Tropic of Cancer, Tropic of Capricorn on the Earth, equal times of day and night, it is now aligned with the constellation of Pisces, not Aries. That's, of course, relative to the Earth, and that basically means that the signs move backwards very slowly, approximately 1 degree every 70-some years, and they just have not accounted for that. It has to do with the very slow wobble of the Earth. Not to alarm anyone, but there is a very slight shift in that respect due to the axis and the way it changes just a little bit in that tilt. So I have talked to you before about human design and astrology. Like I said, that was a recap. What I haven't talked much about yet is the system of the gene keys. I did mention last time that the 64 hexagrams of the I Ching are a direct parallel to the codons that make up 64 amino acids and the building blocks of life, and how profound I think that is. And that is basically what squeaky ball. Oh my goodness. Hopefully you're getting some comic relief from this. One moment. Okay, so Richard Rudd is the creator of the gene keys, and he was a student of Ra-Uru-Hu's, and unfortunately Ra did not allow him to collaborate with the two of them to collaborate. He didn't like someone messing with his system of human design. However, I am offering this information free of charge, and I think with the passing of Ra, things have loosened up a little bit. So I think that what I have to offer here is generally original, and it isn't based on anything proprietary. So I do have permission actually from Richard Rudd to share with you some of the things about the gene keys. I would greatly encourage you to check that stuff out. What I love so much about the gene keys is that he does give you a holograph, he calls it, based on your birth date. And so it is somewhat astrologically related. And anytime you run a chart, either with gene keys or with human design, it will give you the tropical alignment, as I said that I do use. So you don't have to worry about that. He, however, Richard Rudd talks about the shadow, the gift, and the siddhi, siddhi is the highest expression. And so there are many metaphors that you can use to convey this concept. The one I like best is, perhaps you may or may not know, in India, there are lotuses that actually grow in the gutter. So they come out of this mud that collects in the gutter and, start to sprout and flourish and eventually bloom. The mud is basically like the shadow. And so even though it's not real pleasant necessarily, not anything to look at necessarily, it definitely provides that nourishment and is its own gift in that way. But then you do come to the gift where you begin to see how there is a good side to it. Now, usually when it comes to ourselves, we usually feel either that our gene keys or gates, whatever you want to call it, are gifts already, or we don't really generally like to look. So this is a great way to do shadow work if you are interested in that. But most of the time we project and we criticize and dislike the shadows that we see in other people more so than we really look at ourselves, at least for starters. So that's where I've found the gene keys in particular to be really helpful, is being able to understand where that person is coming from, what their shadow might be, and how to see it as a gift, and perhaps even inspire them to express it more as a gift. But what I feel like is missing, unfortunately, because Ra refused, is, I see a lot of value in the human design system as well. I have many points of departure from it, but there are many great and helpful things that I have gotten from it as well. So I would like to basically begin a series where I talk about compromises. Compromises are when one person in any kind of relationship, including a friendship, has one fully defined channel colored in your chart, and you can run your human design chart at humandesignamerica.com, and you can put in /chart. There are many free chart generators out there. You're welcome to find any one you like. So when that whole channel is colored in, red or black, doesn't matter, it can be striped even, and you run someone else's chart and you see that they have one of those gates in that channel defined, but not the other side of it, one way or the other, that is called a compromise. And in any friendship or relationship where that happens, that area of the focus of that channel tends to be the sticking point, the thing that you guys always come back to like a sore tooth, poking at it. And even if you choose to stop arguing it, maybe sweep it under the rug, it will still prevent you somewhat from reaching a greater level of intimacy unless you figure out how to deal with it. And so I want to try to show you the gift, the higher expression for all of these channels and even the gates, and how you can even access the energy of that full channel yourself by receiving the energy of that gate that is not defined in your chart. So the channel I would like to start out with is the 659. I will share with you a couple of charts actually from an anonymous couple. They actually have one of the most effortless relationships I've seen from what I have seen. They, as I'm sharing this with you, you will see that they have that full channel defined in both their charts. So this is not a compromise. This is actually called a companionship channel in this case. And that's partly why it's effortless. If you look closely, you'll see that they have actually two companionship channels. They do have one compromise. That's not the one I'm going to look at today. I do only have one of those gates activated or defined in my chart, and that is the 6 gate, not the 50. I don't have the 59 defined in my chart. And so I'm not currently in a relationship, but when I have tried to be in relationships with people who have that full channel defined, one of the crude ways that Ra has referred to this channel is the channel of, excuse me, this is not necessarily for children, but the channel of fucking. So there is an element definitely of intimacy, of interchange, interaction, even intercourse of a sort. Doesn't have to be physical or sexual necessarily, but that is one of the ways that it can play out. In some ways, this is like a metaphor of the yin and the yang, but it's kind of up to you to decide which side feels like which. I would generally say that the 6th gate has a little bit more of a feminine energy and the 59th gate has a little bit more of a masculine, but it's duality just does this flip-flop thing sometimes, and you really can't necessarily always pin down what's what, and that's for the best. It's supposed to all come together eventually. So when I have encountered people where I have known or at least sensed that they do have that full channel defined, in particular, there have been a couple of men in my life. Not necessarily men that I've had a long-term relationship with, but at least that I have tried dating. They have, and this, let me back up for a moment. Whenever you have this full channel defined, it automatically defines the center on each side of it. So on the 59th gate, we have that in the sacral center, and in the 6th gate, we have the emotional center. So when you have those two centers defined, the sacral always has sort of a yes-no response, or a uh-huh or uh-uh. When it turns on, it's the most powerful motor energy generating center in the whole body graph. So when it is saying yes to something, you can sometimes be blinded by that energy. The emotional center, on the other hand, has waves. And the part I agree with Ra on is that he would say, you should not make decisions when you are at the high end of an emotional wave, and you should not make decisions when you are at the low end of an emotional wave. You should do your best to wait out that wave and wait for that sort of midpoint of clarity to come. The part I disagree with him on is that he generally said you can never get clarity when you have a defined emotional center. I disagree with that. I do think you can reach a point of clarity, but you do have to do that work to find that place of equanimity, find sort of a place of detachment, and perhaps raise your vibration. That being said, whether the person that has that full channel defined is at a high point in their emotional wave or not, they are feeling maybe perhaps in that moment that they do want to have that interaction with you, perhaps intercourse with you. They can be blinded by, and the emotional center is a motor as well. It produces a certain amount of energy. They can be blinded by that energy to what you are actually feeling. And I personally do have both of these excuse me, centers defined in my chart, even though it's not by this particular channel. So I don't necessarily pick up on those energies when that whole channel is defined as much as someone who has them open. However, I knew for sure that I felt pressure. That's the feeling of that compromise. I felt pressure to have that interaction or perhaps intercourse, some kind of intimacy. And the good thing about the sixth gate, at least, Ra referred to it once at least as the women's lib gate. And it can give you some power to put up that barrier and say no and have that energy behind it that people have to respect. I'm not saying it's not possible for your boundaries to be crossed. It is possible still, but more so than people who do not have that gate defined, it is often a little easier to say no. You can still get into sticky situations. I have certainly, gotten into a situation where I thought perhaps I wanted to be more intimate with a person. And in the moment when I actually was faced with that possibility, I suddenly was not feeling it. It's obviously really disappointing to that other person. But what I would encourage those of you who do have this channel fully defined to consider is that consent is always important, and definitely listen to the words that people are saying. I know that there is a community or a group of folks out there who are into certain kinds of domination, that kind of thing. I'm not necessarily speaking against that. However, always make sure you have a safe word, and always make sure that you're starting out from a place of full consent. And that safe word should always be able to be used to change someone's mind, even in the moment, if that's what they want. So getting to the higher or more expansive expression of this channel, really it is supposed to be a coming together of very different kinds of things and a sort of creative impulse. It is the only channel that connects the emotional center and the sacral. And so it can be more than just like the creation of a child, for example. It can be the creation of an idea, of a concept, of two things coming together and forming a synergy, a synthesis that is greater than the two parts by themselves. And the one other thing I will mention, at least about Richard Rudd's work, the Gene Keys, he does talk about the sixth gene key as being about breaking through barriers. And so that's not about crossing boundaries the way he's talking about it. It's just, for example, he talks about the battle of the sexes and, the fight of female against male and just butting heads and feeling like we're from different planets, so on and so forth. This channel, and when these two gates come together, encourages us to acknowledge a spectrum of gender, of accepting our masculine and feminine sides, because that is when we are most whole, most healthy. And that goes for men and women. And all the different, gender identities there are out there, for that matter. The more we express our differences, the more hopefully we're going to find people as we evolve and as we ascend who not only accept but are willing to come together. It's that idea that I've mentioned before of improvisation, the yes and. Whenever you say no in the middle of improv, you're grinding everything to a halt basically. Whereas when you say yes and, you're accepting what that other person has put out there and you're adding your own idea. So in that way, if you'll excuse this metaphor, there is a pleasant friction that can come about from these two disparate, very different ideas, concepts, even people coming together, and you can create something really magnificent. Okay, so before I get to Gaia, Mother Earth's message, and what she might have to add to this concept, I do want to say that please, if you run your chart, run another person's chart with whom you have frequent interactions, please tell me in the comments what your experience has been, whether you resonate with what I'm saying or whether you have slightly different takes on that. And also, please tell me which channel you might like me to cover next. I may decide to do another video on this channel speaking more from the point of view of the 59th gate in the compromise, or I may move on to another channel. It kind of depends on what you guys tell me. So please put that in the comments as well. All right, and as always, I invite you to connect to Gaia with me, because even as I connect with her and convey to you what I hear from her, she may have even more to share with you that will help you specifically. So if you'd like, close your eyes and take a few deep breaths. So Gaia wants me to point out that, unfortunately, with human design in sort of the mainstream system that is out there and the philosophy, there is a little bit of a hierarchy that most people adopt, and a lot of times they do tend to make certain pronouncements over others who have either certain defined gates or centers, and sometimes over those who have them open, when those making the pronouncements do not have them open or do not have the same ones defined. And Ra himself acknowledged that we are all different, and that's one of the beautiful things about us, that we are all different. But we do all have filters as well, and these human design charts actually help us see what those filters are. So for example, Ra did not have a defined emotional center, and yet he made certain pronouncements about those who have it defined. And that was, he didn't get it all wrong. He got some things right, but when you have an open emotional center, you can generally be considered to be empathic. You not only acutely feel what other people are feeling, but you can amplify and sometimes even distort it. And so Ra, having had that center open, was a little bit of a lone wolf. He did sometimes avoid people, although he did do a lot of these human design talks as well. But he definitely needed his downtime. And you probably resonate with that if you have that center open too. But when you're going to speak about someone who has it defined, I think it's probably best to let them speak to it most, because they really know what it's like. to be in those shoes. So for me, speaking as someone who does have the emotional center defined, I know that I have gone through waves, certainly, emotional waves, and I do see the value of waiting for that point of equanimity, that point of clarity in the middle, not making decisions when I'm on an emotional high, not making decisions when I'm at an emotional low. But the more you become aware of the emotions and the wave, the more it evens out. And the more you raise your vibration, the more clarity you have more of the time. But being a motor, it is still definitely an influence on all of us. And even if you have it open and your partner or friend or person in a relationship with you has it open as well, it's quite likely that you will come together in a way that defines it because of one of you having one gate and one of you having the other gate at the other end of an emotional channel. And that's called an electromagnetic connection. So in that relationship, you behave as a person who is emotionally defined anyway. And so all it takes most of the time for us to have that emotional wave happening is for us to be around one other person, because it is about 50-50. For example, I have a sister and a brother-in-law who actually are two of the few people who do not define it together, but then they have kids who immediately do define that emotional center. So we all need to come to a place where we can manage our emotions, take responsibility for them. You know, the worst thing you can do is project them onto others and blame them for them. Even if they originated from them in the first place, the way that you are amplifying them is still somewhat your responsibility. And so the best way that Gaia encourages you to manage that, especially the amplification, is to ground. Feel that energy come down through your body, out through the bottom of your feet, and deep into Mother Earth. Let go of all that no longer serves you. This is like the mud. And then allow the lotus to come up and bloom out of that mud. Allow only that which you need to come back to you. Open or undefined motor centers, of which there are 4, but I will talk more about this later, are some of the most difficult open centers to have. When you're around anyone else who defines them in any way, it's quite the zing, I guess I can say. I only have one of them open, but I feel it acutely whenever that happens. It can be very hard to manage. And I have to admit, sometimes I feel like I want to get away. So the ideal solution is for all of us to raise our vibrations, do a little improv, some acceptance, perhaps a little meditation, but definitely grounding. Breathing helps a lot too, just letting that energy flow. It's when it gets stuck and you try to hold on to it that it can do the most damage. Breathing, and talking about what we're feeling. If we can give it a name, even if the name doesn't fully capture what we're feeling, just trying to talk about it can help tremendously. Can make it not feel quite so big. But when we take responsibility in how we describe those feelings, no matter where they might be coming from, we can diffuse conflict that might come up and occur between two or more people. And if you just need a little space for a little while, I would always encourage you to ask for it and then firmly require it if you need it. It doesn't mean that you can't come back together, but that is the best way to ensure that you don't make rash decisions that you might regret later. All right, I think this video is getting fairly long. Gaia is telling me it's time to wrap up. One more deep breath. Let it go. Thank you so much for joining me. Namaste, beloveds. Thank you for watching, subscribing, liking, sharing, and clicking the bell button to be notified when the new weekly message